Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is iRunShib, or Shib for short, and I appreciate you being here today. The goal of this video is to dive through one of the most fun and impactful builds that I played during the D4 beta that I see as being a really strong endgame build. This build allows you to be tanky, deal significant damage, support your allies, and control beasts. Stick around to the end of the video where I will be discussing a giveaway where I'm going to be giving away copies of D4 on release. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. The first skill we want to talk about is your left click, which is Maul. Maul is just essentially a bear swing. You're going to transform into bear form and swipe your claws in front of you. It's going to generate 14 spirit per swing, which is honestly a buff from where it was initially in the beta. So you're going to be gaining more spirit per swing, which is awesome. So you shapeshift into a Werebear, maul enemies in front of you. There's a 30% lucky hit chance and it deals 26% damage. The buffs that we're going to pick on top of it, which you're going to choose after, is if an enemy is hit by maul, then you're going to fortify for 2% of your base life. This whole build is going to be heavily reliant on gaining health, gaining fortify to keep you at max health, so your overpower does more damage. If you don't already know this, overpower is a new mechanic in Diablo where if you have a large amount of health, you're going to deal more damage randomly, almost as if it's a crit chance, right? So instead of a crit chance, there's also an overpower opportunity, which some of these abilities and inherent passives on this class are going to guarantee an overpower after a certain amount of time or a certain amount of abilities. So moral of the story, you want to gain as much fortify and gain as much health as possible on this build at all times. So when your overpower is activated, it does a ton of damage. So we fortify every time we swing and connect with somebody, and then increase the range of that maul. So you're going to be able to swing and gather more hits as you're swinging your left click. Our main ability on this build is going to be Pulverize, which is going to be a ground slam in bear form. We want to stay in bear form as much as possible. We'll explain why as we get deeper into the build. It's going to keep us as tanky as possible while still kind of maintaining that Beastmaster functionality. It's so much fun. So Pulverize is, like I said, a ground slam into the ground, dealing 70% damage and damaging the surrounding enemies, keeping you in Werebear form, like I mentioned. Your next Pulverize will overpower every 12 seconds. So now we're guaranteeing overpowers every 12 seconds we're using Pulverize, and enemies hit with Pulverize will deal reduced damage by 20% for 4 seconds. So inherently, we're gaining health from our abilities and reducing the damage that we're going to be taking while guaranteeing that we get overpower. So a lot of synergies there, a lot of fun. More on top of that, maximum spirit is increased by 9. This is just something I've noticed in the beta. In this build, one thing we were kind of struggling with was spirit generation and maintaining having that quote-unquote mana. Spirit is your mana on this build. So I spec into that a bit in the passives here, increasing our maximum spirit, and our basic skills generate 18% more spirit. Next, we're going to get into Debilitating Roar, which is one of the strongest abilities that the Werebear form will have. Shapeshift into a Werebear, bellow a mighty roar, reducing nearby enemies' damage dealt by 70% for 4 seconds. This is a buff from where it was inherently in the first couple betas. This is unbelievably strong, and not only does it affect you, but it affects your teammates. So Debilitating Roar also fortifies you for 22% of your base life. So now you're going to have a 22% shield every time you use this ability. It's got a relatively long cooldown at 18 seconds, but still, if it was shorter than that, it would be busted. Debilitating Roar also heals you for 4% of your maximum life for each second of its duration. So you're gaining health while you're gaining that shield at the same time and reducing the damage of the enemies around you. And this affects bosses, which is super strong. Now we get into the Beastmaster functionality. So in my personal opinion, with experimenting with this class, I found a lot of support from the wolves in the poison creeper. You can also go into ravens a little bit, but I found synergy with the wolves and the poison creeper, and I'll explain why. So the wolves are going to be, it's essentially 2 wolves next to you, and every time you click the ability of the wolves, it is going to launch the 2 wolves on top of an enemy, dealing 154 damage. It essentially leaps onto them and focuses the target. They're great for pseudo tanking, they're great for dealing a lot of damage, and there's some inherent buffs, which I'll show you what I mean, to your base class. So wolves will also deal 20% increased damage to those that are immobilized, stunned, slowed, or poisoned. So you'll inherently have some of that in your build, but also get some of that poison from your poison creepers, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Your wolves attack have a 10% chance to fortify you for 5% of your base life. So while your wolves are feasting on all these enemies, you're going to be gaining health at the same time. You're reducing damage of the enemies, dealing damage, and keeping your pets alive. It's a lot of fun. So now let's talk about the Poison Creeper. The Poison Creeper is literally just these vines on the ground around you, but when you activate the ability, it'll actually surround the enemies and immobilize them. So you'll see here, activating the vine strangles all surrounding enemies, immobilizing them for 2 seconds, and poisoning that for 90% damage over 2 seconds. So it activates that poison. Inherently, this summon is going to be dealing poison damage and spreading poison. So it's going to synergize with those wolf buff of them doing 20% more damage to poisoned enemies. But alongside that, Poison Creeper's immobilized durations increased by 1 second, so now it'll be 3 full seconds of immobilization. Doesn't work on bosses, but really strong for, if you're getting swarmed by mobs and you want to escape, or if you need to just pin them down in a location so you can reposition. Really strong for that. And then last but not least, Poison Creeper's active poisoning duration is increased by 3 seconds. And I only chose this simply because it synergizes with the wolves. Having these, your wolves deal more damage inherently from the Poison Creeper is really strong. Now let's get into our final ability that we're going to use on this build, and that is Trample. Trample. So shapeshift into a Werebear and become unstoppable, which is really strong, having unstoppable in the kit. Charge forward, dealing 105% damage and knocking back enemies. Enemies who are knocked back into terrain take 63% additional damage and are stunned for 3 seconds. So not only is it an unstoppable charge and gap closer, it also can stun enemies. On top of that, Trample deals 150% bonus damage. The bonus is reduced by 50% for each of the first enemies hit. So it just does more damage, but the more enemies you hit, the less it'll do into the back line. Casting Trample grants 20 spirit. So the nice thing here is now we have another way of gaining spirit while using Trample. It gives us some of our spirit so we can go right from Trample right back into our pulverizes on top of the enemy. So really, really strong. Some other stuff that we're going to add here from the passive note is going to be, while in the Werebear form, you receive 15% additional healing from all sources, which, you saw some of the healing that we have inherently in the build is only going to help. And moving forward from there, when you remain in Werebear form for at least 20 seconds, which since every single one of our abilities revolves around Werebear, it's going to be very often, every 20 seconds or so, you will have a guaranteed overpower. So not only are we getting overpower from our pulverizes, but we'll also have a guaranteed overpower every 20 seconds as well. And since overpower is very much about how much health you have and what percentage of health you're at the time of overpower, staying at max health, max fortify, and guaranteeing overpower is where this build really shines while our companions are dealing side damage 24/7. We're not going to spec into any of the ultimates here. They recently buffed the ultimates to where they have reduced cooldowns. But I mean, I just don't see a lot of utility. The one I could potentially see would be Grizzly Rage. You shapeshift into a dire Werebear for 10 seconds, gaining 20% bonus damage and 20% damage reduction. But the bonus damage is increased by 3% for each second while in this form. It's 10 seconds, and you can extend it from killing enemies by another 10 seconds, so 20 second total. But then it's a 50-second total cooldown. I don't really see a massive use for this. It's nice because it'll heal you and such. But I just think that having these other abilities is much stronger than replacing it with a super long cooldown for this specific build. The ultimate that we're going to be looking for, or our key passive, is going to be Earthsign Strength. Gain 20% additional maximum life while in Werebear form, ultimately increasing our overpowered damage for 3 seconds after leaving it. So if you accidentally leave it, or you don't have the cooldowns up at the time, I don't see much use for leaving it. And then while healthy, deal 30% increased damage. This is a really key aspect to this ultimate, because our whole job of this build is to stay at max health and max fortify as much as physically possible. So while we're doing that, while we're healthy, which should be nearly all the time, even while bossing, I had very little issues when using this build while bossing. You just inherently do 30% more damage across the board, which is super strong. So let's talk about Spirit Boons. Spirit Boons are essentially the class passive for Druid. What you can do with Spirit Boons is you can choose one passive from each of the different boons to identify as something that you'll keep on your build forever. You can specialize in one of these trees as well. So the trees were deer, eagle, snake, and wolf. You can specialize in one of them to guarantee that you can lock down 2 passives in that specific tree. So let me show you what I mean. So in wolf, I chose to do fortify for 10% of your maximum life whenever you use a defensive skill. Since we're using a couple defensive skills in this build, you will fortify for 10% of your maximum life every time you use that ability. Super strong. For the snake tree, I chose masochistic. Critical strikes with shape-shifting skills heal you for 3% of your maximum life. It's just something for an additional heal percentage. A lot of these other selections on this choice don't really work for this build. For the eagle, I chose gain 10% maximum life overall. And last but not least, I chose to specialize in deer, which allows you to get 10% maximum spirit, 10 maximum spirit, which is very strong for this build where you're kind of struggling with spirit, even though they've made it a little bit easier in the recent patches, especially the patch that they're going to have before launch. It's just going to make this build even stronger. And then also take 10% reduced damage from elites. That's always going to be strong because the one's downside potentially would be that this has a little more struggles with bossing. But honestly, ever since the inclusion of these companions on this build, it really doesn't struggle with bossing very much, but still taking 10% reduced damage from elites, super strong and always will be. When getting into the Paragon board, I don't want to dive too deep into the boards because that could take a video in and of itself. I just want to show you one of the strongest legendary passives you can get in this Paragon tree. So you would look at the Survival Instincts passive tree, and you'd go through it and ultimately lead yourself to Survival Instincts. While in Werebear form, you deal 1% increased damage up to 50% for every 1% difference in your current life percentage between you and the enemy. So that is very strong because you can do an insane amount of damage. For example, if a boss is at a low percentage of health, and they start turning up, their mechanics get harder and harder, but you're at 100% health, you inherently do 50% more damage to that boss, which is wild. So all you have to do to enter in to win a copy of Diablo 4 on my channel is go to my Twitch page and hit the follow button. From there, all you have to do is type into the chat, !raffle. When you do such, you should get entry tickets. Granted, subs get a couple extra tickets, but other than that, there's no other advantage, and I will be drawing them on Friday the 2nd. So that's roughly how the build is going to shake out. If you are interested in this kind of content, come over to the Twitch page. We just recently got announced as a Diablo partner, so we'll have all the Twitch drops and the exclusive mounts from the gifted subs, etc. I'll explain more of that on my channel. Thank you so much for sticking to the end of the video. Hit the subscribe button down below, and I will see you on the next one.